everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's 4 o'clock and we like to start on time around here. We hope everybody's having a great day. I have everybody muted so we can get right down to business. My name is Diane Michael. It's my pleasure today to be your host and to welcome you to this CE credit provided by Expert Reserve Services. By being involved in this platform, you are authorizing permission for this to be videotaped and uploaded to our website and use in marketing materials. Additionally, no reproduction or use of this video may be made without prior written consent. Again, thank you so much for being here today. The course is course number CRS 9014, Structural and Non-Structural Reserve Course. Instructor is Anastasia Kolodzik. Today, we're going to be talking about reserves, structural and traditional, and how to navigate in the coming years. Talk about a brief history, SB4D, milestone inspections, structural integrity reserve studies, and important association requirements. We have this scheduled as a 2-hour education course, but Anastasia believes it will end in about an hour with questions to follow. If you have any questions, please go ahead and shoot them to, you can send them right to me, Diane Michael, or you can send to all in the comment box, and they will be addressed at the end. So you may just want to hold off because Anastasia will probably address those questions during the presentation. Additionally, at the end, I will send an email of the email address of the person at Expert Reserve Services that you're going to want to send your CAM license number to and your name on your license so she can submit that to the DBPR and get you the credit that you need for this course. Today, I would like to highlight Anastasia. She oversees all of our reserve study inspections, processing, and reports. She is meticulous about working closely with clients, creating a reserve study that is not only functional, but also one that works within budgets. She has a very impressive record. She has achieved the Professional Reserve Analysis, the PRA designation from the Association of Reserve Analysts. She's a certified reserve study specialist, an RSS, and a Florida Licensed Community Association manager. She's also a CAM and a Florida State Certified Continuing Education provider with the DBPR. Again, let's just hold questions to the end and be watching for the communications through chat. And with that, I'm going to take myself off and send this over to Anastasia.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's keeping cool on this 90-something degree day in Florida. Maybe we only got a few more months of this to go. It's just stifling out there. And today we're going to talk about reserves. So I hope you've got a really good caffeine drink next to you because this does get a little intense. There you go, Jay. A little intense sometimes, and Mary's got hers. So maybe I can keep you guys awake through all this. But we're going to go over reserves, structural and traditional, and I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. Some of the things that are in this approved course are from before the latest legislation, and we'll go over all that so you guys will have that information. But I cannot change the presentation because it is approved by the state. But what I can do is we can have a conversation about what has changed. It's not very much, and most of it is about the milestones. It's there's still got some pretty stringent requirements on the SIRSs. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe. Screen 2.
Anastasia, if you want to go to slideshow at the top.
Yeah, hang on. I'm trying to get it to come up. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Ah, there we go. All right, now let me try to get the slideshow going. Slideshow. There we go. From the beginning. All right, can you guys see that now?
Yes.
Okay. So again, this is reserves, structural and traditional. Now, what has happened is they have taken what we have known about reserves for the last, oh, I don't know, 30 years or so, and they have decided to make it into two different things. One is structural and one's non-structural. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with this here. It's not wanting to do it. Okay, maybe I can figure this out. They've changed it into structural and traditional. So what we have known as reserves in the past is traditional, and that is everything that the association is responsible for. The traditional reserves have now been split with the structural reserves, and structural reserves are just that. They are the components that hold the building together, and there's no plainer way of putting that. It was said in the beginning by one of the best engineers in the whole state that if it's a structural item, it is something that holds the building together. If that component fails, the building will fail. So a lot of the questions about does this or that go into structural, we will cover in a little bit, but I wanted to start off with the complete definition of what the difference is between structural and traditional. Structural is the 8 items that are designated by the new statute, and non-structural is basically everything else that the association is responsible for. Now, if you will bear with me for just a minute, let me see if I can figure out how to do this. All right, Diane, I might need your assistance here for just a minute.
Here.
I can't get it to change. Like I can't get to my next screen. I don't know why.
Arrow or enter.
Nope.
Thanks, Samuel.
No. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to start over with the sharing and see if that will give me a. Yeah, it's not giving me any sort of option to go to the next slide.
Okay, go back to the stop or can you get out of the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I stopped
Okay.
sharing.
Now you can, so on the PowerPoint, and everyone, thank you for your patience. We did this a few days ago, no problem. So, you know,
Yeah.
technology is fun. So on the PowerPoint, there you go. Now just click on one. Don't go from the beginning. Just click on the first slide.
Mm-hmm.
Just double click.
Okay, I did nothing. Yeah.
Resume
There.
slideshow. There you go.
All
Now
right.
yeah, you might just have to do it.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's try that. Okay, but then how do I? Okay, here we go. Now we're in business, guys. Sorry about that. I was just hitting the wrong button, of course. The computer is not my forte. All right, so a brief history. Here's our agenda for the next hour. We're going to do a brief history. We're going to talk about SB4D. We're going to talk a little bit about milestone inspections. And do we have our engineer on? Nick Lopez? Okay, maybe he'll get on in a little while. And then we're going to talk about structural integrity reserve studies and then important association requirements. All right, the compelling reason to act. Before the Champlain Towers collapsed in 2021, which we all heard about, we are all still dealing with the repercussions of that. The only other poured-in-place concrete building to have collapsed in the U.S. was a federal building housing the Drug Enforcement Administration in Miami. Imagine that. It happened in downtown Miami on August 5th, 1974, killing 7, which was not nearly as much of a disaster as one we just had. The result was a 40-year recertification program in Dade County in 1979. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Dade County's requirements, but they are completely different than the requirements we are experiencing in the middle and the upper part of the state. The municipalities have been given jurisdiction to instill even further requirements on top of the state legislative requirements that was implemented for SB 4D and then SB 154. So if you are dealing with a association that is located, I would say anywhere from the Tampa line across Florida down, I would call the municipality that it is located in, and I would find out what their requirements are, if any, on top of the state legislated requirements. Broward County adopted a similar 40-year recertification program in 2006. Now, this recertification program is very similar to a milestone. And in some aspects, if it has been done within the last 5 years for a 30, 40, 50-year certification, it can be used in the place of a milestone. But again, that depends on the municipality. So that's something that we're all going to have to find out on a case-by-case basis. Okay, traditional reserves. Traditional reserves are now for associations 2 stories or fewer and homeowner associations. Traditional reserve studies should be performed, and everyone asks this question, how often? Traditional reserves, it's always been a 3-year cycle. Every 3 years was what was recommended. However, with the current inflation and the current construction costs and our economy going absolutely nuts the way it has been, annual updates is highly recommended. Now, that's not saying that everybody should have an annual update. That's saying that if you just had a roof done and you're in the middle of your 3-year cycle, or if you just redid your entire pool area, yes, you should have an annual update done. Some people do an annual update, wait 2 years, and then go back and do a level 1. It just depends on the association. And again, that is a case-by-case basis. The traditional reserves consist of the recreational areas, remodeling of common areas. Now that includes your floor coverings, your lighting, your interior paint, your carpet, your furniture in your clubhouse, your kitchen equipment, anything that's interior remodeling of the common areas, your fencing and your gates, asphalt parking areas. Now that's a tricky one right there, because that's always been a statutory requirement, is to have your asphalt included in your reserves. You still have to do that. So if you get a structural integrity reserve study, which does not include the asphalt or your parking area on the outside of your building, then you are out of compliance. You still have to have a reserve for that asphalt, because that is still statutory. Separate garages and carports, signs, water features, roof paint, anything over 10,000 if it falls outside of the SIRS. So that's your homeowners associations and your condos that are 2 stories and below. Now, there is no statutory requirement to perform a reserve study for condos and homeowners associations 2 stories and below. That is a best practices recommendation. And a lot of associations will argue the fact that it's not necessary because it's not required. Well, it is required because, it is necessary because you're going to have that for your budget. Unless you have a reserve specialist on your board, you really do need to get one. Now let's dive into structural. These are the items that are mandated by the state. These structural integrity reserve studies, like we said before, are required every 10 years. Now, common sense will tell you if you budget for something in 2025, By the time you go back in 2035, it is going to be completely different. If you budget for something in 2025, by 2027, your budget's going to be all out of whack because of the inflation and of the construction costs and the economy. Whether it goes up or down, it's just going to be out of whack. You can project, you can add your inflation, and that's basically what happens. But if you do not redo that structural integrity reserve study within that 10 years, then you're going to be off on your numbers. That's why we suggest very highly, very strongly, that you do the SIRS the same time that you do your traditional. And that way you get on a cycle of at least every 3 years. Your structural integrity reserve study includes your roof, your load-bearing walls, and other primary structures. Now we're going to stop right there for a minute. Load-bearing walls is self-explanatory. Other primary structures. If you have a tower that has a garage underneath it, then that garage becomes part of your structure. So you will need to include that in your structural integrity reserve study. If you have and I don't know of any in Daytona that are built like this, but down south they are. If you have a swimming pool that is 3rd or 4th story and it is attached to the building, that becomes part of the structure and it has to be in the structural integrity reserve study. This is meant for 3 stories and higher. If you have a garage and then you have 2 stories on top, 2 living quarters on top, that is considered 3 stories. If you have a garage and you have 1 story on top with an attic, that is not considered 3 stories. So 3 stories is 3 stories above ground. If it's an attic, of course, it's not considered. If it's a loft, that is a residential area. It doesn't have to be a full story, but that would be considered a story because it is a residential area. So if you had garage, 1 story, loft, that would be considered 3 stories. Fireproofing and fire protection systems. A lot of associations have their fire pump that they are responsible for. They have their backflow system that they are responsible for. And they also have their fire equipment that they are responsible for. The fire equipment is usually on a maintenance contract. That is part of your operating. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about with fireproofing at the minimum is your extinguishers, your alarms, your sensors, your speakers if you have them, things of that nature. And that is a minimum. So don't think that you have to replace, in this report, you have to replace everything at the same time. It is usually done on an allowance basis. And an allowance is a fund for partial replacement or repair of pieces of the component. So it's just like with the plumbing and electrical, we do that with an allowance basis because no one is going to rip out every piece of plumbing in a building and put it back in the same year or the same time. It's going to be done by piece by piece. That is where the allowance system comes in. And that's based on historical values, or it's based on any projects that are coming up. So when you get your SIRS and you look at it and it says you've got a $5,000 a year allowance for plumbing, that means that that is where you're going to pull from to fix the pipe that's going to break in 2 months, or you're going to pull from the fireproofing line that is going to replace the sprinklers in 6 weeks, that sort of application. Same thing with the electrical system. You're not going to rip out every piece of wire and every breaker box and every socket in that building and replace it at the same time. So that is done on an allowance basis. And that's one of the things that you can tell your board members. you know, when they started getting concerned about, are we going to have to put in $40,000 a year to replace everything? No, you're not. You're going to have to put in a amount that will cover the projected repairs for that component on these three items especially. Waterproofing and exterior paint. That is the same thing that we've always done with reserve studies. It goes in structural now. Windows and doors. Windows and doors are only if they are association responsibility. There are a few buildings that have what we call the window wall in the front, that have the atrium look and everything is windows in the front. Those would be association responsibility. Those would need to be reserved for, depending on their age, condition, and product. So if you have 40-year-old windows in a window wall, yes, it's going to be time to replace them pretty soon. If you have brand new windows in your window wall, of course, you're at the front of the timeline. Every exterior window and door that is the association responsibility, including utility doors, stairway doors, garage doors, all of that goes into the structural integrity reserve study. And any other items requiring repair or replacement that exceeds 10,000 and the failure to replace or maintain negatively affects the above items as determined by the engineer or architect. That's where we get into these underground garages, these side garages that are attached to the building, or the garages that span across 3 or 4 buildings underneath sub-associations with a master on top. We just had one of those. The person or persons doing the site visit and the architect or engineer that's doing your milestone will collaborate and decide how that needs to be applied. Anything that affects the integrity of that building standing there is going to be in your structural integrity reserve study. Now, these items have to be fully funded, and that's where everybody's hair is standing on end. The structural integrity reserve study has got to be fully funded. Now, that does not mean it has to be 100% funded. 100% funded is based on the component, or what most people know as the straight line method. The straight line method is outdated, and it does not give the association board the flexibility it needs. Pooling reserves is allowed for your structural integrity reserve study. You can pool the reserves. Straight line reserves are going to tie your hands when you need to move funds between these lines. Somebody's asking, if you're pooling reserves, do we need to have a line item separate for everything for asphalt and paving? If you're pooling reserves, you can include everything in the TRS. But now keep in mind, the structural integrity reserve study has got to be fully funded, and that means you will have the funds you need when you need them. It is an amortization schedule for each one of your components. Even if you have a pooled reserves, you are going to need a component schedule, because that's what those funds are going to cover. It's not recommended to have a contingency line or an emergency line or any other line that's generalized like that. You really need to have it laid out item by item. Now, that's not saying that you have to say 14 wickerback chairs, 23 lounge chairs. I mean, you don't have to get that specific. You can say pool furniture, or you can say clubhouse furniture, things of that nature. But you need to have line items for each one of these categories at the very least. And again, structural integrity has got to be fully funded. There's no, the state has not given us any wiggle room on that whatsoever. Now, your traditional reserves do not have to be fully funded, and they can be funded at a very low percentage. They can be not funded at all based on the new legislation. However, it is not recommended at all. I've had associations that go as low as 5%. I've had associations that go as low as 1% because they're concentrating on the structural integrity reserve study. As soon as you can, bump up those traditional reserves at least to 30 to 40%. That will cut down a lot on your special assessments. There is such a thing as a combo study that we started back in May of 2022 that began all of this ball rolling. We don't do the combo anymore, so I'm not going to go over that. I am going to say in that respect that it is highly recommended that you have 2 reserve accounts. Now, whether you do this internally or whether you do this at the bank, have 2 reserve accounts. Because if DBPR comes knocking on your door, which they will because they've got people that are going to be policing this, you can hand them your structural integrity reserve study. You can hand them your bank account statement for your SERS account. They can look at it and they go on their merry way because that's what we want. We don't want them hanging out and finding things wrong and wanting to fine you. Here are the requirements. All right, to clarify, the only time reserves do not need to be fully funded is when owners approve this by majority vote. Actually, that is not correct. The only time reserves do not need to be fully funded is when they are traditional reserves. The SERS need to be fully funded. An association must have a structural integrity reserve study completed at least 10 years for each building on the property. That is 3 stories or higher. When you go to hire, a reserve professional, make sure that they are going to break this down by building because that is part of the statutory requirement. Each one of your buildings has got to have their own section, not necessarily their own report, but their own section within the report to identify that building. And if it is not identified clear enough, it's not going to be accepted. So that's something that needs to be looked out for, regardless of who you hire to do it. Before a developer turns over control of an association to the unit owners other than that developer, they must have an SIRS completed for each building on the condominium property that's 3 stories or higher. So if you have any properties that are just about to get turned over, make sure that that developer knows that it's his responsibility or their responsibility to perform a SIRS before the actual turnover takes place. This requirement applies to any association existing on or before July 1st, 2022. So if your association was created on June 30th, 2022, you still have to have a SIRS. You don't have to have a milestone, but you have to have a SIRS. So that's another point of confusion that we experience a lot is the differences between milestone and SIRS. They are 2 complete different entities. I've had, associations call and they say, oh, well, we don't need a milestone because we've already had our SIRS. Well, yes, you do because you were built in 1974. Okay. So they are 2 complete different reports, and they are 2 complete different professionals that do that. You have to have a SIRS completed by December 31st, 2024. That is 3 stories or higher and be fully funded. The realization that there are only so many people in the state of Florida that can perform legally an SIRS has come to pass. And this is where the latest legislation has changed things a bit. Now, I don't know it verbatim of when it is. We'll look it up and we'll send it out to you guys. But if your budget falls on a certain time, then you're going to get an extra year, basically. But under no circumstances is an SIRS. Now, this one I do know isn't under no circumstances will an SIRS be completed after December 31st, 2026. So that's going to be the very latest that you're going to be able to perform this and have it legal. Now, if you are under the requirements that you still have to do it by December 31st, 2024, which is this year, and you can't get it scheduled until next year, then the state has made allowances for that, depending on your budget. And oh yeah, thank you, Adriana. Yes, your budget must be done before the fiscal year ends. So that's another point of confusion that a lot of people don't understand. If you need a 2025 reserve study, you don't wait till 2025 to do it. You do that in 2024. You always work a year ahead. More requirements. Effective December 31st, 2024, members of a unit owner-controlled association may not vote to use reserve funds or any interest accruing thereon that is reserved for the items listed in the SERS for any other purpose other than their intended purpose. Pooled reserves are allowed for the SERS studies. What this means is once you put an item into the SIRS, say for example, you have one building, you're part of a multi-condominium association, and all you're responsible for is the building. Everything that is on the SERS is going to be part of that building, except for the elevator. Well, the elevator is not included in the SERS. It's not in that list, but that's the only other thing that you have. So if your board decides to put that elevator in the SERS, it's going to automatically fall under the requirements of the SERS, which means you can't move it out. You can't use funds for anything else for it, and it has to be fully funded. Now, a lot of associations in that situation are choosing to do that if they only have one or two other items. And again, once you do that, just make it very clear, it has to be fully funded. And elevators are expensive, and I use that as an example because that has been the most popular question is, well, all we have is a building and an elevator. Well, our building falls under SERS, but then our elevator falls under something else, under the traditional. Correct. But you can choose, the board can choose to put that elevator in their SERS. It's just got to stay there. And any interest that is accrued on those funds in that SERS has got to be filtered back into the SERS. It can't go in traditional and it can't go into operating. It has to go back into the SERS. You know, a lot of associations in the past have taken their interest on their traditional. They may have dropped it in operating. They may have used it for a special project. You know, they may have put it in a different fund. But with the SERS, the funds have to stay in the SERS. And somebody says to clarify, traditional HOAs with single family homes are not required to have a SERS. Correct. Yes, that is correct. If you have single family homes in an HOA, of course, HOA is under 720. This is all about 718. But the HOAs are not required to have an SIRS. Even the ones that are 2 stories and 3-story townhomes. If it is under 720, if it is filed as a homeowners association, it does not fall under the SIRS because it's not 718. And I would look for that to be changed sometime in the next 3 years, just so you guys know. If an association fails to complete an SIRS pursuant to the paragraph, such failure is a breach of an officer's and director's fiduciary relationship to the unit owners under 718. What this means is they can be sued for not doing the structural integrity reserve study. And this is in the statute. It blatantly says it's a breach of their responsibility. That's one of the very few things that they made extremely clear in this statute. The board members are responsible. I know that they're going to say, oh, well, we got E&O insurance. If it can be proven as neglect, then E&O will not kick in. And that's what a lot of them don't understand. The responsibility can then be transferred over to them personally because they volunteered, and that's how it's being put out and how it's being looked at. That with this new statute, they can be prosecuted personally and fined personally for not performing a SERS. And that is a big deal. And what that is going to do, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, what that's going to do for a lot of the associations is going to make it hard to get board members. It's going to make it hard for to talk somebody into serving on the board because of this liability. Okay, who can perform this structural integrity reserve study? An individual holding an RS, which is called a reserve specialist, which is given by Community Association Institute. Well, not given, it's earned from Community Association Institute. That is one designation. A PRA, which is defined as a professional reserve analyst, which is earned from the Association of Professional Reserve Analysts. A licensed structural engineer under 553899 or an architect must perform the visual inspection. Now, one of those four people has to perform the visual inspection. The study is required to include and state the estimated useful life, remaining life, and estimated current replacement cost for each one of your components. Now, one of the things that they changed is we are now allowed to include inflation. Inflation is a hot topic. The inflation that we have been experiencing, in upwards of 8% in the last year or so, has made a huge difference in what the contributions in these reserve study recommendations are. And a lot of associations don't think it's going to hold at that. You can do inflation one of three ways, and this is something you can tell your board. You can do no inflation, which is what they have been doing for years and years, which I don't agree with. You can do historical inflation, which is the 2.8 to 3.2%. And now all of this is optional for the board member. Each one of the associations have got the option to do any of these three. Or you can do a sliding scale. Now, what a sliding scale is where you take this year's current inflation and you apply it to your report for next year. And then it drops by 1 point until you get down to, we don't usually go any lower than 4% when we do the sliding scale. That will give the association a clear vision of what these components are going to cost to repair or replace. Now, that also ties into your annual updates or your every 2-year updates, if you will. Your updates are going to be completely revamped with the current inflation at that time. And then again, at that time, the association can choose what type of inflation they want for that report. The study is to be performed by a reserve specialist, PRA or an RS, and that is also stated in the statute, to formulate the information, identifying all the information gathered during the visual inspection. We gather information while we're on property, but we also gather information from the association. That's why you will see emails and requests and phone calls to board members, to association managers, to maintenance professionals to gather the information. Because if somebody says, oh, well, I don't know when the roof was redone. And then a board member says, well, I just bought, I don't know when it was redone either. So we have to look to the maintenance professional because they've been there for 5 years and it was done 4 years ago. They're going to be the ones that's going to tell us that. So gathering all this information is paramount to getting a proper reserve study. And I know it's a pain, but that is what needs to be done. Once you have all those dates and once you have everything down pat, you don't have to do that again until the next replacement, because then you know, well, they're going to redo the parking lot in 25, so we'll put that in 25. But the reserve set specialist that holds a PRA or an RS are the only two designations that can perform a SERS. That is another part of the statute. If your reserve study provider does not have one of these two designations, then they don't have the requirements to do the SERS. They can still do the traditional, but they can't do the SERS. And that is very important because we have seen a few of the SERS get kicked back because of that. The ones that needed to be registered with the state, which the state is, if you all got the email, then you know that they are keeping a list of who's done their SERS and who hasn't. Some of them, they have requested a copy and they have kicked them back because they weren't performed
To
by the
keep your
proper.
camera.
Okay. And this is going to be your result. Your result is you're going to have fully funded reserves for your SERS, which is going to keep the state happy. It may not keep the board members happy, but it's going to make your job a little bit easier simply because you know what's coming and you know that you're going to have the funds to replace the roof, to paint the building, to fix that electrical box that needs to be replaced. You're going to have a distinction between structural and non-structural reserves. Again, that is splitting up those two items. You have structural, you have non-structural. And the way it's going now, and this is what we're seeing a lot, is the associations are taking their full reserve fund and they are splitting it. So you can, for the initial SERS, you can move the funds from traditional to the SERS to get it started. Now, I would not recommend you moving every last penny over, but you can get a good jump start if you've got good funding going right now. You also have proper planning for replacements and repairs, and you're going to be fully compliant with the law. Another part of that new statute has given DBPR almost $2 million to fund new officers and agents to go out and police this. I'm sure as we speak, they are being trained on what to look for. We have seen a couple of them out already in their little cars, and they are cruising around looking for which ones they're going to knock on the doors first. The additional benefits to doing all this, you're going to have sustained property values. Now, I don't know if you guys have been looking at the way condo prices are plummeting at this moment. If you have good reserves, that is going to keep your property values as high as they possibly can be. The property values, if your association has been keeping good reserves over the last 10 or 15 years, then you're going to be in good shape and your property values are probably maintained. Now, I'm not a real estate agent and I'm not an attorney, okay? However, you can always have that argument that we have good reserves, so your fees are low. Well, you want to keep that, but you also want to keep it maintained. Chuck asked, are co-ops falling under the same rules as condos, or do we have separate rules? No, co-ops are also falling underneath the SIR risk requirement. It is for chapter 718 and 719, Chuck. You're also going to have expanded mortgage capabilities. If you have good reserves on both sides of the coin, then your mortgage capabilities are going to be somewhat broader. I do know that FHA, VA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac are all requiring recent reserve studies, and they're requiring them to be funded, fully funded, before they will even look at drawing a mortgage for that project. You're also going to have less risk of the special assessments. Now, I always like to refer to the special assessments as the scarlet letter of the associations. That is something that you want to avoid at all costs. Once you get a history of doing special assessments, it is going to affect your property values. It's going to affect your mortgage capabilities. It's going to affect, who can and will buy in your building. And also, you're going to get maintained properties. Everybody wants to live in Disney, but nobody wants to pay the mouse. If you if you keep your property maintained, then you're going to have a better return on your investment. Did we ever get Nick in here, Diane?
I am not sure if he's in here, Nick. Are you with us? Let's see.
Nick
Okay, there you go.
Lopez. There we go. Okay. So now I am going to turn this over to our structural engineer, and he's going to go over a little bit about the milestone inspections.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Lopez. I'm with Expert Reserve Services, and I'll discuss the milestone inspection with you, ladies and gentlemen, today. Some preliminary trivia. Who has to do milestone? Buildings that are 3 stories and taller, or 50 feet and taller, or commercial buildings who have occupancy categories known as assembly occupancy categories, seating 5,000 people or more, 500 people or more, or have 5,000 square feet or more of space, need to do a milestone inspection. And a milestone inspection is to be done when the building reaches 30 years of age and every 10 years thereafter. So those buildings that are 3 stories and taller or 50 feet and taller are called threshold buildings in the state of Florida, and they're subject to the milestone inspection. And the milestone inspection itself is basically a condition assessment of the building, and it's broken into 2 phases. In the Florida statute, they define the process as broken out in phase 1, and here's the sort of key phrase that you want to keep your ears peeled for. If the engineer or architect finds significant structural deterioration, those 3 words are important, significant structural deterioration, then in their phase 1 inspection, they would find at least the first indicators that there is significant structural deterioration, or not, in which case the phase 1 concludes the entire milestone inspection as being satisfactory and not needing any further phase 2 inspection. But if phase 2 inspection is warranted because they found initial signs of significant structural deterioration, then the building has a choice. Basically, well, let me say it this way. They have a choice in who to hire. And I'll give you my recommendation just by way of explanation. I actually recommend that folks hire someone that's different than the engineer who did the phase 1 inspection, basically to avoid the possibility of people coming back and questioning whether the engineer who wrote the scope for the phase 2 inspection was mismotivated in their conducting the phase 1 by, getting greedy and saying that there's damage to invite more scope of work to be created. So that caution being stated, whoever you hire for a phase 2 will basically be hiring the engineer that you hire or architect that you hire, the general contractor and any subcontracted vendors to conduct an investigation to discover the full extent of this significant structural deterioration, the first signs of which were discovered in the phase 1, so that the full extent of the significant structural deterioration is completely understood. And then the design professional, who is that architect or engineer, will write a scope of work defining what the extent of that significant structural deterioration is. And then the building owner will need to retain and have a contractor get permits to accomplish the repair work to repair that significant structural deterioration. And under the statute, they have 6 months to make efforts to complete that work. Or if they need more time at the 6-month mark, they're required to go to the city and say, we need more time, please give us 6 more months. And the city at their discretion will give some amount of time, presumably 6 months. I think it's actually required to give 6 months more, until the repair work is completed. And when that significant structural deterioration is fully repaired, then the milestone is considered completed and the requirement satisfied under the statute. And at that completion date, you then begin your clock for the next 10 years, where you'll be required to do it again. So that's the breakdown of milestone inspections into their phase 1 and phase 2. I believe we'll be, we haven't already submitted our quote for phase 1 milestone inspection, and I would be performing that phase 1 inspection. And then we can have a conversation if you want to retain us for phase 2 ownership representation. Sometimes building and condo owner associations like to keep the phase 1 engineer as just an extra set of eyes to sort of bounce quality assurance concerns off of, as the phase 2 team may be required to complete any scope identification and repairs of any significant structural deterioration that's identified in phase 1. So I would be doing your phase 1 under this initial quote. So with that, I would like to take any questions if you do have any questions. If not, I hope I gave you the 4-minute version of a milestone inspection.
Thank you for that, Nick. One last thing that I do want to tell everyone, the structural integrity reserve studies, phase 1 and phase 2 inspection reports are now considered part of an association's official records, must be provided to a potential purchaser of a unit. If they request it, you have to give it to them underneath the statute. The SIRS and the milestone also has to be made available to each and every unit owner once it is complete. Now, you don't have to tell them what's going on in the middle of processing it, because that can be very dangerous. But you do have to provide access to it once it is complete. With that, I would like to say thank you. And does anyone have any other questions while we are still on?
Anastasia put it on the chat, the question, but my understanding is that the cities are not open yet for you guys to file the results of the milestone. So my question is, the 10 years when you're going to have to repeat those inspections, are those based on the date the report was, the inspection was performed, or the date that was filed?
It is my understanding as of right now that it will be the date that it's performed. Now, as far as filing it with the city, I know that Volusia and a couple of others, Nick can tell you more about this, I'm sure, that they are putting in requirements, and they're trying to decide how they want the reporting to be done and how to do it as we speak. Nick, do you have any information on that?
Yes, actually, if I understood your question correctly, correct me if I didn't. You were asking when the 10-year clock starts again. I
Yes,
actually think the statute I'm looking up right now says that it's 10 years after the last one was completed, as per the acceptance and completion date of the report when finally accepted by the city. So, if you have a good building and you only have phase one, they say, we see no significant structural deterioration, and you submit the report and they accept it, that's pretty quick. You'll have your report pretty quick, accepted by the city. And then 10 years after that acceptance date, you're required to accomplish another one. If you have to do some repairs and it takes 6 months or more, then whenever that work is completed, that completion date would start the clock for 10 years.
thank you.
Now, the other question is, we're a condo association comprised of 32 buildings that are only 1 story high. The community was built in 75. What are our responsibilities regarding milestone and SERS inspections? You are 1 story high, so you don't fall underneath any of those requirements. It is highly recommended for an association of that age to have a reserve study, though, a traditional. If you guys will look over in the chat, you will see where to email your CAM license number and your name as it appears on your license. Please make sure you send your exact name as it appears on your license, because we've had a lot get kicked back because someone put their maiden name or they didn't put their middle initial in, and we didn't know to put that in. And you can email that to jasmine@expertreserveservices.com. Please don't send it to this chat. Please send it in an email. And does anybody else have any other questions? You will be getting 2 credit hours for this, even though it didn't take us 2 hours. Most of you have been beat to death with this reserve study stuff, so you know the majority of it. All right, I think we are ready to wrap up. And as always, you can always call the office. You can shoot us an email. You can go in our website and look. We have quote forms that you can fill out on the website. We have a sample structural integrity reserve study you can use to show your board, and we're here to help you in any way possible. Some things we can do and some things we cannot do, but we will do as much as we possibly can to help you do your job as painlessly as possible. So with that, I will bid you guys adieu and have an absolutely, wait a minute, we got one more. Could you clarify the July 1st date for Sears versus Milestone? July 1st.
Can you hear me at this
Yes,
point?
I can. Can you?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you were mentioning, I'm sorry, I was just trying to catch that before you left, the requirement, when you talked about before July 1, 2022, if the association was created or the unit owners took over.
Right, that was for the SERS.
Yeah, that you must have the reserve study and the milestone study, the structural.
No, the milestone is based on age, and the reserve study is based on when it was in operation. So that is for the SERS.
Okay.
Yeah, July 1st, 2022 or before is for the SERS.
Okay.
And again, that does apply to any association that is under 718 or 719. And the email again is Jasmine, JASMINE @expertreserveservices.com.
And if you liked this class, go ahead and make a review on Google, please. It really helps. And there's a link right there in the chat.
So you guys have a great rest of your week. Try to stay cool. And if you need us, get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.